Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. I'm Toni Marcolini. And again, for the viewers and listeners who know that I'm an attorney, I don't often get the opportunity to delve into that side of my career. I'm very excited to have an attorney by the name of William Singer here with me today. He's 5 decades an attorney, successful not only in advocating and practicing law, but as an author of several pieces of significant queer legislation. And I'm really looking forward to delving into even what he's working on now, which I think touches on our local politics in that he's present politics, in that he's working on something with Ukraine as well. So I'd like to get into his career and so many things. So let me just start it. So welcome, Bill.
Nice to be here, Toni. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I mean, of course, you're a legend in this area and in New Jersey for certain. In that regard, I have to give a shout out to attorney Heidi Lepp, who connected us. So we give a shout out to Heidi.
Love Heidi.
So let's start. I think the first thing that I'd like to, because there's so many different cases and things that you've had your hand in, marriage equality in New Jersey literally just got codified, signed into law in 2022. And you were, I mean, heavily involved in authoring the bill and lobbying to get it to happen. So can you speak on that a little bit, that journey for you?
Sure. Well, first of all, marriage equality, we've been fighting for marriage equality in New Jersey since 2004, when the Massachusetts Supreme Court initially said that in Massachusetts, same-sex couples could marry. And there were a series of lawsuits that had to be brought. The Supreme Court in New Jersey in 2007 ruled that same-sex couples were entitled to the same rights and privileges as different sex couples as far as marriage. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court left it to the legislature to determine how to implement its mandate. And the legislature at that point was very afraid of backlash if they gave gay people, same-sex couples, too many rights. And so they created this separate but equal status called civil union, where you could enter into a civil union as only open to same-sex couples, and they would have all the same rights and privileges as if they were married. They would not have any federal rights, but they would have state rights. Unfortunately, once you cross the Delaware River or the Hudson River, your rights disappeared because Pennsylvania and New York did not recognize civil unions. And so you were really, it wasn't like, you were married and you can go to another state and say, I'm married. Here, you didn't have any rights. And the Garden State Equality brought a lawsuit based actually on clients of mine. They were a New Jersey couple, 2 men who were in Manhattan. One of them got hit by a taxi cab and taken to Bellevue Hospital where he needed brain surgery. And his civil union partner showed up and wanted to help make the medical decisions. And the hospital said, this is New York and we don't recognize civil union. And therefore, the ill person's sister who lives down in Delaware has to drive up to New York and sign all the documents. So when this was presented as a reason why civil union did not work and did not fulfill the mandate of the New Jersey Supreme Court of giving us marriage equality, Judge Mary Jacobson, sitting in Trenton, said, yes, you're right, and same-sex couples should be allowed the right to marry. At that point, our governor was Governor Christie, and he basically freaked out because he was going to run for president, and he didn't want this stain on him, and he applied to the New Jersey Supreme Court for an injunction. And the New Jersey Supreme Court denied the injunction because they only will grant an injunction if they think you're going to win. And they said, Governor Christie, you're not going to win this argument. So he backed off. And as a result of Mary Jacobson's single-handed decision, we had marriage equality in New Jersey. As the years progressed and I started to read these dissenting opinions by U.S. Supreme Court Justices Thomas and Alito, that Obergefell was mishandled and was improperly decided, and it should be overturned. And then I realized if Obergefell was overturned, then marriage equality in New Jersey was hanging by the single thread of the trial court decision of Mary Jacobson.
Now, for people who don't know,
Right.
the Obderfeld versus Hodges case, right, 2015, the Supreme Court basically heard a case about marriage equality and decided that same-sex marriage would be lawful in the entire United States, that it was, it was constitutional. And I want to say Justice Kennedy was the swing vote, right, on that to make that happen, actually authored the opinion.
Right.
And so that's why the law changed throughout the nation. So what you're saying here is you're saying that since then, there have been some opinions that criticize that in that 2015 opinion.
And sought to overturn it. And if they got overturned, then marriage equality would only depend on what your state said. And in New Jersey, at that point, all we had was a trial court decision. And so we really needed to codify that decision and make it part of the statutes so that if Obergefell were overturned, that it wouldn't matter in New Jersey because it was a statutory right. Presently, before this law that we're talking about, if you had gone to your local registrar to apply for a marriage as a same-sex couple and they looked up in the law book, it wouldn't say it was available. It was only by this trial court decision. So that's why I wanted and pushed for this codification of marriage equality. And now, as we see this draft opinion in the potential overturning of Roe v. Wade, that the theory being used by the court there is the same theory of privacy that affords us same marriage equality. So if they take...
Yeah, sure. Going back to Griswold, right? That's where it starts, and then Loving, and then you go from the Loving case to Roe, and yeah, there's a pretty clear pattern of that, the privacy law cases.
Right. So if the Dobbs case overturns Roe, then you could say, well, then next will follow that marriage equality we overturn, marriage between races, contraception, all of those things. Now, we're in New Jersey, and so, we're pretty lucky, and we're not going to lose any of those rights because they're all going to be states' rights. But it's going to be a game of, which state has which rights. What we need to do is figure out how we're going to help our allies and friends in other states, hostile states, how are we going to help them to overcome these losses?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a major accomplishment that just finally did get signed by the governor in the state of New Jersey.
Right, in January this year.
Yeah. And you also had a lot to do with confirmatory parentage law. I mean, I'd like to say you're spearheading it.
I coined the term.
You coined the term. Well, wow. I didn't even realize that it came from you. Can you speak on that?
Sure. So when same-sex couples had the right to get legal recognition of their relationships in New Jersey, which started back with civil union back in 2008, and then continued with marriage equality through 2013 and on, one of the side effects of that is that when a woman gave birth, if she was married, her spouse's name would be put on the birth certificate, because under the what they call a marital presumption, it is presumed that the spouse of the woman giving birth is the other parent. Now, that is a heteronormative concept, where they say, well, the husband is the dad. But it's a rebuttable presumption. And if you are not the parent, then, your name could be removed. And, it was a shock to me when I first learned, and to most people, that your birth certificate is not proof of parentage. It's hearsay. It was what was told the vital statistics. So there is a New Jersey Supreme Court case that said there are only 3 ways in New Jersey you're a parent. You gestate the child, you contribute genetic material, or you get a judicial order. So I have all of these lesbian same-sex couples that are in a civil union or married, and one gives birth and the other one's name is on the birth certificate, and they feel, well, we're secure, our family's secure, we have a birth certificate. And I tried to explain to them, well, not really, because this is what the court said, and the non-gestational, non-genetic mom is really at risk. And then I had one of my clients who, heard what I was saying, but, it's just another expense and who needs it, got sick, had cancer, and went to Social Security to get benefits for her sons based on her being disabled. And they said, prove that you are the parent. And she gave them the birth certificate. And they said, this is not proof of parentage. So I think it started to sink in to these lesbian couples that maybe they needed to do more. So the way I tried to convince them was come up with this euphemism. You're not adopting your child. We're just confirming your parentage. It's a confirmatory adoption. And that seemed to sort of work its way, into their psyche. But adopting, most couples said, why do I have to adopt my own child? And so up to this point, they would have to go through a process in order to complete this judicial confirmation, which required a child abuse clearance, a criminal background check, a hearing before a judge in person. That was intrusive. Many times I had judges asking questions that were totally unrelated and wrong. And so I came up with this streamlined process. If you are married or in a civil union at the time of the birth, and both of your names are on the birth certificate, and you can prove that no one else has any parentage rights, and the way we do that is basically a receipt from the sperm bank. We send in that documentation to the court, and they send us back an order saying that these two people are the parents of the child, a confirmatory adoption order. So there's no hearing, there's no background check, there's no home study. It's much, much easier. And yet now they have protection so that they are free to travel, free to move. It's subject to full faith and credit under the US Constitution, that they can now have confirmation of their parentage. And I've had clients use this even while traveling abroad. And when I was creating the law, I remember that my clients really had issues with the term adoption. And I thought of making it confirmatory parentage order. But I know everyone knows what an adoption is. And you're in this hospital emergency room in Idaho, and you have to prove parentage, and you pull out, your parentage order. They're going to go, well, I don't know, we have to send this up to legal. But you pull out an adoption order, everyone knows what that is. And so does the immigration officer in Greece when he says, where's the dad? And you pull out your adoption order. Oh, you've adopted these children. Well, you really didn't adopt them. Well, you're always, but everyone understands you're the parent. So
now you mentioned something interesting when you said if you can show a receipt from a sperm bank. What happens if that wasn't the case? What happens if they use sperm from somebody they knew?
Well, then of course that person might be a parent. The only way you can use sperm from New Jersey, the only way you can use sperm from a known donor is if it's done under medical supervision. If the insemination is done under medical supervision, it doesn't have to be a doctor, it could be a nurse practitioner, it can be any of a number of medical people, that cuts off the rights of the donor. Unfortunately, for many people who can't afford to go to a doctor, they create family, by other means, and they set themselves up for this exact problem that they have a male who is a potential parent. I have had clients in this situation where the guy didn't want to exercise any parental rights, but when his mother found out she had grandchildren, she went to court, and he was a dad. You can also be a dad, if the child goes on welfare and they start looking for, well, who's the parent? So, parentage is very nuanced, and most people don't realize, that there are all these legal restrictions that they have to watch out in order to protect their family.
Now, the parentage law, I mean, I think New Jersey was the first in the nation to pass it.
Uniform Parentage Act you're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Mhm.
Right, and everybody else kind of followed suit for our lead. So essentially, you kind of set ablaze something that truly changed the nation, not just New Jersey.
Right, but the Uniform Parentage Act that New Jersey passed needs to be updated. For example, we talked about the sperm donor statute. If you're a sperm donor, it's another, but it doesn't cover egg donation, doesn't cover embryo donation. So there are lots of ambiguities or open issues in the law that still need to be dealt with.
Is that something you're working on, or?
Yes, well, we got the sperm donation statute recently. We got it revised to include not just doctors, but other types of medical professionals. But really, if you use an egg donation, does that cut off the rights of the mom, of the egg donor, excuse me? We have situations where lesbian couples, they harvest an egg from mom one, they inseminate that egg and create an embryo and implant it in mom two, who then gestates the child. So you don't want to just cut off egg donor rights automatically if you're using it's more complicated than that. Now, those couples are already protected under the law. One's a gestational mom and the other's a genetic mom. I still tell them to do confirmatory adoption. I said, what are you going to do when you're in this Idaho hospital? You're going to start pulling out your DNA records to prove you really are the mom? I mean, get a judicial order. It's 2 pages. It's so simple. But of course, I'm a lawyer.
Everything seems, I think everything seems simple to attorneys, but it's very daunting to the average person who really doesn't. I think they go into situations not truly seeing the potential ramifications, right, of what could be. I mean, we tend to look automatically at situations with, oh my goodness, this can happen, right? You're exposed this way, this can happen. And we think in terms of exposure, in terms of our clients, always. Somebody asks me a question, I think of all the ways you're exposed. But the average person goes, what are the chances, right, that that's going to really happen? Like, they don't see it the same way. So I think that it's important that somebody is, caring about these issues as they're being raised and looking into ways to fix them. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening with Ukraine, right? There's some with surrogates, and you've been involved with literally leading an international group of attorneys. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and what's happening?
So just specifically, Ukraine is a popular place to do surrogacy, particularly for people from Western Europe. I think most people are surprised to learn that most countries in Western Europe, surrogacy is prohibited. It's very difficult to, and most of those people are coming to the United States to create family, but Ukraine was a cheaper alternative. And all of the surrogacy contracts were written with the intent that, of course, the child would be born in the Ukraine. And each of the, particularly in Western Europe, each country has its own specifics of what it needs, whether they need a mom on the birth certificate, or they don't want a mom on the birth certificate. They need to, they want to have the national because what's happening is the couples that are creating children in the Ukraine want to bring them back and register them in their Western European country to get them nationality and rights of a citizen of that country. So all of these arrangements were made and everything is set up, and the war in Ukraine starts, and the surrogates start fleeing the country. So now the child is going to be born in Poland. And so Polish law is going to cover who is the parent, not Ukraine law anymore. And Polish law is going to cover who's on the birth certificate, or if they're in, Hungary or whatever country they end up in. And so, we started consulting attorneys in Poland and Bulgaria and other parts of Eastern Europe, along with some of my Western European colleagues. I was organizing and helping to organize how they're going to deal with this. Some of them getting the surrogates to come to the country where the family lived, to give birth, getting special exemption from the government. We also had couples who the child was born in Ukraine, but they couldn't get there. It was what really pleased me about all this was this is the long answer, if that's okay.
More than okay.
All right. So, I've been doing this work for a long period of time. My office is in Belmead, New Jersey, which is a semi-rural area. I see more deer than cars on my way to work. When I was doing it, I felt very isolated. There were other attorneys in the area doing this work. Who could I talk to? This is, pre-internet even. And I created in 2009. Well, in 2009, I had the idea, let's have a one-day meeting of attorneys from around the country who do queer family law. And so we be off the record, and it would be closed door, and everyone would have to be vetted. This is not a training thing. This is exchanging strategies and support, and what do you do, etc. And that meeting, it was for U.S. attorneys, and I worked very hard to get attorneys, not just from San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York, but also from Montana and Kansas and Arkansas and Texas, where they really have very much different issues. And it was a huge success. And that became what's known as the LGBT Family Law Institute, and it's still ongoing. We're about to have a meeting next month in Los Angeles. So about 3 years after I started this, I was in England and I was having lunch with a colleague, and I was telling her about it. And I said, maybe you should try this in the UK. Well, they tried in the UK. They have a UK Ireland group, and it's a huge success. And they never had any way for these attorneys to, know each other and consult. And we all have listservs now, so there's a constant flow of information and also moral support. When you're having a hard case. And then the people in Australia came to me and said, well, we want to do this. So we created a Family Law Institute in Australia. And then the people in Europe said, well, you got in UK and Ireland, we want one in Europe too. And then we did Latin America. So now there have been affiliates all over the world modeled on this concept. And it was the European group that really got together and started to work on how to deal with these issues coming from the Ukraine. The European group is working a lot because you have all these people who are members of the EU, and whether they will recognize a child of a same-sex couple in all the countries to give freedom to travel and to have access to the rights in all the countries. And they go to the European Court of Human Rights, where they've won some significant decisions. But there's a lot of pushback for these people. So what I really like about the group is that we're there to give moral support to each other. Like the attorney from Estonia was explaining to us that he had a same-sex couple from Sweden who were married in Estonia, and he battled to win them recognition of their marriage. They said, we will recognize this couple. We're not going to recognize any Estonians to get married, but we'll recognize the Swedish couple is married. The next day, his office is firebombed. So, it's these people are really working on, in difficult situations, and it's nice to meet with other colleagues from Germany and Netherlands and France, and we all have some similar issues. But to really give support to these people really out there in hostile, isolated areas, that's what fed me, because that's what I had faced, 40 years before. I wasn't firebombed.
No. So what is the status of that? I mean, at this point?
Status of the Ukrainian?
Yeah. Like what are they actually making headway? And
yeah, well, right. Well, so, yes. Like for in Ireland, they have bent the rules of what they'll accept now because of this Ukrainian situation. All of the Ukrainian surrogates who are working for Israeli couples got taken to Israel to give birth. So it's piecemeal, but it's happening. But as children are being born, each country is having to deal with these issues. At the same time, they're dealing with these issues that they don't even like to recognize. children born for surrogacy. I mean, in France, they put up a lot of resistance, and Italy, a lot of resistance to this. And each country has its own initial problems. And the United States is way ahead on surrogacy issues compared to Europe, for example, and a recognition of who is the parent.
Quite an accomplishment that you managed to literally, again, like the confirmatory adoption, parentage, a law that you spearheaded. Getting these groups together seems to have started from your little office right in New Jersey, right, and just took off as to be something true not only around the nation but now around the world. That's a significant accomplishment.
I'm very proud of it. Now, none of this would have happened in these other places without somebody spearheading it, and I was just guiding them. But the concept that I took, and there's this interaction among these attorneys who had no other way to interact before. In the UK and Ireland, they don't have groups like Lambda. So they became someone that the government came to and said, well, you're a group of established attorneys who do this. Can you give us some advice on these issues?
Wow. So you're very heavily involved now in law to do with insurance mandates for infertility.
Yes.
I think you're actively working on that now.
I am.
So we talk a little bit about what's happening there?
Sure. There's medical infertility and there's social infertility. Medical infertility is because of your physical nature, you're unable to create family. Social infertility is based on your social position. You're a single person, so you can't create a child as a single person. You're a same-sex couple. You can't create a child as a same-sex couple. Or you're trans or whatever. There's some reason that's socially related, not medically related. Presently, in New Jersey, there is mandated insurance coverage for heterosexual couples that have infertility problems. And if you are in a plan that is governed by New Jersey law, it's mandated that your costs for these infertility issues be paid. Same-sex couples, single people don't have that mandate. And that's what we're pushing for. That the legislation, the statute in New Jersey be broadened so that social infertility would also be covered. I've also been pushing that under the tax code, you can deduct your medical expenses related to your medical infertility. But the IRS has ruled that if you're socially infertile, that is not a deductible expense. Waller-Bergefell is still the law of the land. And under that law, all couples are entitled to all of the rights, same rights as other couples. Then I would argue that the IRS should change how it views whether it's deductible or not. So that's one of the envelopes I'm trying to push now. I'm trying to, there's an urge among people in the queer community to create family, like there is for anyone. And they have huge roadblocks. For a gay male couple to use a surrogate and get a donated or purchased egg, you're talking spending $120,000 to create a child. Most people can't afford that. I have a lot of couples mortgaging themselves, getting the grandparents to contribute, GoFundMe pages. Whereas, if social infertility was recognized, a lot of those costs would be gone. Now, a surrogate would not be paid under this new legislation, but all the creation of the embryo and all of that would be covered by insurance. So that's what we're working on that. We had expanded the law some in 2017, and now this is our second go at trying to expand it even further and help people create family.
So what's the status of it at this point? I mean, is there a new bill that it's going to be introduced. We've just presented it to the sponsor.
I helped write the bill, we presented to the sponsor, and I expect that sometime before the end of the summer, it will be introduced in the New Jersey legislature.
Wow. So are you actively lobbying, I would guess, at this point?
Right, and once we get the bill number and the two sponsors in the Assembly and Senate signed on, then we're going to be looking for co-sponsors and other allies to help us push this through the legislature. It's
Yeah,
not
you're-
that expensive.
I'm sorry, I was gonna
No, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say you have a history of lobbying. So, I mean, I think you did it years and years ago,
Yes.
before practicing, or
As a young lawyer, I was a registered lobbyist as well, for various groups. I did a lot of environmental lobbying, and I was involved with Common Cause during Watergate, and lobbied on election law reform and lobbying reform. And I still have my hand in those issues today.
well, wow. I didn't realize that you were involved in anything to do with Watergate. That has to be an interesting story to tell.
Well, it was the outfall of Watergate in New Jersey. How are we going to, we're going to have campaign finance. We have a publicly financed gubernatorial election. That was, we'll have a disclosure of who your contributors are and where you're contributing. We have lobbyist disclosure, who you're working for. So now most of those reforms are 50 years old and probably need some updating, but they were huge at the time. And you do this work as a pro bono young lawyer, it reap benefits, because I got clients who said, well, we now have to report under this law. Who knows about it? Oh, Bill Singer knows about it. He wrote it. Okay, we'll hire him. So I have those clients for 50 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're very well known. I mean, you clearly have a wonderful reputation, and for this type of thing, exactly, for not only advocacy, but bringing together groups for, moving the ball forward, I guess is the best way to say it. You always, when you take, on a project, you tend to move the ball forward. And I think your history of lobbying has to be helping, I would think, with this, with getting this done.
Yes, of
I
course.
have to imagine.
If you're going to write legislation, you have to understand the whole process. So another area that we can talk about that I've had some impact in is helping transgender and gender nonconforming people align their identity documents with their gender identity. For years, you could change your gender identity from male to female or female to male in New Jersey if you had gender changing surgery. Well, trans people feel like, I don't have to cut up my body for you, just because you want me to. If I feel I'm this gender, and so now we have self-attestation where of your gender, where you can just sign a document that you attest that this is your gender, and they will change your gender identity on your birth certificate. And you don't have to cut up your body to get it. And then, of course, we also had them add the category of X for gender nonconforming. God, when I was in high school, we hardly knew anyone who was gay, but nonetheless transgender. Never heard of these things. And gender nonconforming, I mean, these are new concepts, but we've gotten the government to move along. So trans people, gender nonconforming people would come to change their name to a name that better aligned with their gender. Well, under the old rules that were 50 years old, you had to publish in the newspaper a legal ad saying, I am Mary Jones and I'm changing my name to Sam Smith. You had to publish once before the hearing and once after. Well, my clients were afraid it's going to be in the newspaper. And I would say, well, it's only a legal ad. Who reads legal ads? But I had a client in Salem County, a rural county in New Jersey, where everyone reads the Salem Times, all 8 pages, including all the legal ads. And so I went to a judge in Salem County and said, you have to waive this publication requirement because it's going to lead to injury to my client. He's already been harassed because he's gender nonconforming or he's trans. Who knows what's going to happen if it appears in the newspaper. And a judge very gingerly and cautiously agreed. We got the New Jersey Supreme Court to agree to just do away with publication completely. And it really was a testament to all the work we've done on cultural competency training for these judges, because the New Jersey Supreme Court gave us one of the reasons they were making this change was a number of trans women of color who were being murdered. Now, that was pretty amazing that they were aware of it. And so they said, we're getting rid of the publication for that reason. So we said, great, thank you very much, but that's not enough. These are court records. Anyone, anytime in 10 years could throw a name into some search engine and find out that person changed their name in this court record in New Jersey 20 years ago. And you're applying for a job or you're trying to rent an apartment and people all of a sudden find out you're trans. It's none of their business. We petitioned the Supreme Court, and now all name changes, trans, gender nonconforming, heterosexual, are all sealed. It's private. No one needs to know. And so trans people and gender nonconforming people have really been protected as a result of these changes that we made within the last year.
Wow, that's significant. That's significant. What cases, I mean, statutorily protected or through case law?
Well, we got them to change, how you do it. So there's no publication. They took away it was a rule that had been put in place in the 1950s to protect creditors, because a creditor could see that you're trying. That doesn't make any sense anymore. And then we just there was a rule. We went through the rulemaking process at the Supreme Court and asked them to start sealing these records, because it was harmful to our clients, and they heard us. So there had been a case, an appellate division case, where a woman had gotten the publication waived because she was a victim of domestic violence, and she could prove that she was a victim. So there was proof of that. And for a lot of our clients, it's speculative. I'm afraid. Well, that's not enough. I had a judge in Bergen County. My client had been come out as gender nonconforming. She was disinherited and disowned by her family. She moved to another state. She got into a relationship with abuse. She left that state and moved to New York, and the abuser followed her and continued to abuse her. And then she moved to New Jersey, and I asked the judge to seal the record so that my client could be protected from this abuser. And I had proof of it. Judge said, we don't do that in Bergen County. That's our rule. We don't, well, I mean, that's the type of thing that makes my head explode. So I moved that the judge be removed because of prejudice against trans people. If you didn't think that this was a case where we had proof of abuse, and you just say we don't do that in Bergen County, you're violating the judicial ethics, which say you're not supposed to discriminate. And I wrote to the assignment judge of the county. He got removed, and we got our sealing order. But now we don't have to do that. We don't have to ask for sealing orders. It's sealed automatically. And there's been such a, I guess it's just like 40 years ago that no one thought they knew anyone who was gay or lesbian. And then, all of a sudden people started coming out and they realized that their cousin was, and their friend was, and the person they knew in high school was. I think that's happening with trans and gender nonconforming people. They had these feelings, but they never felt able to express them because there was such public distaste and opprobrium and criticism. But now, people feel much more comfortable doing it. Now, we're fortunate in New Jersey, we have a safe state to do that in. Trying to do that in Oklahoma or Texas is a whole different thing.
Yeah, I mean, safety, I think you bring out an excellent point. Years ago, I think it truly would have been a safety issue, right? Where that kind of information becoming public could cause a person to be literally murdered.
Yeah.
So that there was very much safety concerns, which I think forced most people to silence.
So do appearances at a group called PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It's been around for many years, and it was a support group for parents whose children were coming out. And when I would appear there like 20 years ago, my daughter says she's a lesbian, and what does that mean? And my son is gay, and is he going to be discriminated against? Now I go, those people don't show up anymore. Their daughter's lesbian. Oh, their daughter's lesbian. Okay. Oh, my son's gay. Well, that's fine. Now it's my daughter says she's gender queer. What does that mean? How can I support my daughter? These are all new issues, that are there. And I'm learning as much as anyone else. I mean, I'm a cisgender guy. I never had any questions about my gender. But now I understand that people do. It's a very complicated issue. And where I really see it happening now, particularly within like the Family Law Institute, where you have vetted lawyers who've been practicing queer law for a lot of years, having issues about trans women in sports. I think some of them feel like if they express some hesitation about that they're going to be shouted down because you're not supporting our trans colleagues, our trans allies. But there is a physical difference. I mean, you may feel that you are one gender or another, but you were born into a different gender and with different physical attributes as a result. And is it fair to have trans women competing in women's sports? We don't care so much about middle school and high school, but when you get to college athletics and professional athletics, where there's much more at stake, are we on an equal playing field? These are nuanced issues that really need a little more thought and discussion than are possibly, where I think a lot of the community's initial reaction is, if you say you're a trans woman, then you participate in women's sports. But, that's very black and white attitude. And I think it's more shaded than that. One colleague of mine who's been an advocate for 40 years, well honored in the community, said, I don't want penises in the women's locker room. Hey, and in New Jersey now, in our women's prison, because we said that prisoners whose gender identity is female should be housed with females, we now have 2 women in the women's prison who are pregnant by one of the other inmates who identifies as female but can make a woman pregnant.
Yeah, these are a lot of upcoming important conversations to have.
And they come up when you have in these other states where they're trying to block trans affirming therapy for kids, and all of that, and so you're trying to be allied and supportive of the trans community in that regard, and at the same time wondering about what is really, happening like athletics, and I just think it's not so black and white an issue, and that's why I'm not in favor of using the term LGBTQ, because it segments the community. Either you're in the L branch or the G branch or the B branch. No, we're all queer, and and we slide around. You might be attracted to men one day and attracted to women another, or you might want to express yourself as having your feminine side versus your masculine side. And so I feel like terms like gay are going to be anachronistic in 50 years. People are not going to longer say I'm gay. We're all this queer community, and we're all evolving and learning who we are all the time. And it's time to stop segmenting and saying, well, you're this or you're that.
So are you working on something at this point that we didn't cover? Is there an issue that you think is important that you're working on?
Family. Who's family? How do we define family? I have been saying to judges for decades, you have to recognize the reality of this child's life and stop putting them in this box created in the 1950s. Many children have more than two parents for a variety of reasons. Whether it's, that's how the parents, the three people decided they were going to raise a family together, or there's step parents involved who help raise a child, and significantly, who may have no rights really. So states like California and Delaware and Maine and District of Columbia have statutes that recognize that a child can have more than two parents. In Ontario and British Columbia, their birth certificates come with 4 spaces for parents, automatically. 4
Really?
spaces. You don't have to fill them all, but up to 4 will recognize. And so there's this whole movement towards intentional community, creating family in an intentional way. A lot of young people can't afford to buy a house themselves. They create an intentional community with other people that they're close to, and create a family that way, chosen family. You have a lot of polyamorous situations now where there are more than 2 people involved, and they want recognition of that, their families. And so they're modeling on what the lesbian and gay people did back in the 1990s, starting small, getting municipalities to have domestic partnership recognition for polyamorous families. So there are 3 towns now in Massachusetts where you can register as a polyamorous family. Not that it gives you any big benefits, but it gives you recognition, and it's the stepping stone, the building block to getting more recognition of this.
Well, I do think there are situations for children where they are being raised by more than the 2 people who created them, right? And so I think that does have to be dealt with in some way, because there are situations where the person, I'll give you an example. Years ago, I had a case where the mother and father had created this baby, and the father just disappeared. Mom met somebody else when the child's about a year old. That dad steps into the role of being the only father the child knows.
Right.
And that child believes that that's his dad. And 10 years later, when mom is unhappy with dad number 2, she says, all right, well, I'm walking away. I'm taking the child, and you can never see a child again.
Right.
All right. So dad comes to me and says, can she do that? Like, yeah, I'm not on the birth certificate. I have, there's more or less, he had absolutely no legal rights. And at the time, the law was just starting to change for psychological parenthood. Right. In the state of New Jersey, there had just been a famous case that had come out that talked about how you can be the psychological parent. And if you were found to be, let's say by a psychologist, to be the psychological parent, that would put you on parity, with biological parents to potentially fight for custody or the like.
Visitation.
Yeah.
And they pay child support.
Yeah, pay child support. Right. And so that case had just happened.
Right.
So
we were
able to use that to argue our way into the fact that,
and that was a great advance, psychological parentage. But the psychological parent leaves money to this child in their will. They have to pay a 15% inheritance tax to child because it's not the legal parent. If they were a parent-child relationship, there would be no inheritance tax. If the psychological parent dies intestate, no money goes to the kid because it's not their legal child. If the psychological parent is eligible for Social Security benefits, the psychological child, doesn't qualify.
Indeed, that's a vacuum. That's like a hole you could fall right in it right there. That needs to be addressed, because there are situations where people genuinely feel that this is my child, right? They feel like they raised that person, that this person is my child in my heart and in all ways.
So I've been pushing the envelope in New Jersey to try and get 3-parent adoptions. So the judge, I've been able to do it in the adult adoption context, not in the minor child context. There was
So
a
when you
case,
say adult, adoption concept, you mean for children who maybe after they turn 18 and
right.
they say, well, this person raised me, I want to add them to my birth certificate.
Well, not the birth certificate, but again, what we try to do is get an order recognizing this other adult as a parent, so that when that other adult dies and leaves them money, we can then say no inheritance tax because they are a legal parent. Or here, they're a legal parent and they're eligible for this benefit. Or they're illegal, they died intestate and they were a legal parent, so the child does inherit. Or there's a family trust, that says only adopted children, children, but have even children by adoption. Well, they can benefit from the family trust.
Yeah, so important.
Right.
Yeah, it really matters especially into the life of children. This is an important issue that
And
people don't really give
security
any
of
thought
family.
to.
When I first started doing this, judges did not believe that a child could have two parents of the same gender. That was impossible. You can't have two moms, or two dads, and so the child was totally unprotected. And eventually we got them to recognize this and allow, second parent adoption. They had to go through a lot of hoops to become a parent, do a home study as if this child had not been living with them for the last 5 years, and the background checks and hearings and all of that. But we've gotten that modified. We've got now to have confirmatory adoption, but it takes a while. It's a struggle, but it's been good.
Yeah, I mean, I heard you argue once that regardless of the outcome, like, judge, this kid's going home to the same house.
Right.
Like,
What difference does it right? Why are you demanding all this? But I had judges say to my clients, I hope you're establishing a mental health fund for your child, because they're obviously going to have problems being raised by two parents of the same gender, which is, I just kick my clients under the table that, keep your eye on the prize, don't listen to this person.
yeah, it's, these are such important issues. And the fact that you're leading them as, at this point, a global expert.
I have attended meetings all over the world discussing these topics. I do know a lot what's going on globally.
I mean, it's just an honor to get, even a few minutes of your time to get your perspective and to hear about what's happening in the field and what you're working on. These are all important issues. How can people help, Bill? People who want to help, how can they help?
Well, I'm a big advocate about helping locally and staying locally. We live in New Jersey, which is a wealthy state, has a lot of generous liberal people, and we get national organizations who do great work come into New Jersey and get money and then do the work in other states, which is needed. But our New Jersey organizations are running on shoestring budgets, and they provide such needed services on the ground here. When I was a newly openly gay man, I'm feeling very, again, isolated and not knowing where to turn and meet other people. There was an organization in Morris County that had a meeting every Monday night, rain or shine, workday, holiday, didn't matter. You could go there on a Monday night and know that there'd be other people. And, that was very, very important to me. And it's so important to other young people to know that there's, and so it's great to support these national organizations, but we got to support what's on the ground here. And there are wonderful organizations in New Jersey doing wonderful work for homeless kids, who've been thrown out of their home because they're queer, for all types of youth, for seniors. That's a whole another area now that's, popping. People are what they call recloseting because they're going into a senior facility and they don't feel comfortable being out as a queer person in a senior facility. So they hide. It's just like, they used to do in the 1950s and 60s, hide who they were. People who are discriminated against because they're openly gay in a senior facility. I mean, so, there's a wide range of things. Helping people in who don't have the ability or the financial ability to hire a doctor, helping them create family in a way that will secure their family and give them security.
So, I mean, is there a particular organization you recommend people contact or donate?
Well, Garden State Equality is the major New Jersey-wide organization that does great work on a lot of these and many of these issues we talked about. They were a key in getting marriage codification passed. They're going to be key in getting infertility laws mandates expanded. So, and that's the only really statewide. But then there are all of these local organizations. And there's New Jersey Pride in Highland Park. There's Hudson Pride. There's GAMC in Morris County. There's Life Ties that runs a home for homeless queer kids in Mercer County. There's a Camden County organization that's just starting. So they're out there. You know, this is a little research, but they're out there. And they Q-Spot in Asbury Park is a drop-in center. You know, they all do this great work on, as I said, shoestring budgets.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing the plight, you know, of getting these things passed or moving the ball forward and what are significant issues. And for your work, I mean, 50 years, you know, 5 decades of being in the, you know, in the trenches is a very long time. And you've made significant differences in what you've done and touched many lives.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say thank you to you, I guess, for all the lives of people that I think you've mattered in, that you will never meet you, right? We'll never get that opportunity. You've changed a law that's going to touch.
These are all, you know, these, I have my walls are full of these photos of families I helped create. These are all, yeah. I feel, I have a very warm feeling when I think back of all that I've been able to do. It's worked out well.
Well, I wish I could award you some Lifetime Achievement Award here, but all you have is my admiration for a lawyer who's taken his gift and his craft and become exceptional at it and made a difference. A lot of times, you know, we go in a courtroom, we take on cases, but we don't often get to say I made a difference today. And I think you've had a lot of days that you got to go home and say I made a difference. So I say cheers.
Thank you.
And, you know, I'll try to put up a link, at least for 1 or 2 organizations that people can donate or help in any way that they can.
That'd be great.
Available. And I'm going to close the interview out and say thank you so much for being here and shining a light on these important topics.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it and I enjoyed it.
As did I. Bye, everyone.